Well, up next on CBC, in the charity community, they are known as the generous generation. We're talking about older Canadians and many who also go to church on a regular basis and give a significant amount of their money to charity every year. But they're getting even older, and the generations of Canadians coming up behind them go to church less often, if at all, and give much less to charity. It's causing some anxiety among Canadian charities. John Longhurst is our regular faith contributor. He's been looking into this. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy.
So how does religion affect giving?
Study after study shows that the more religious someone is, the more they tend to give, and the more often they give. In 2018, the latest figures that are available from Statistics Canada, 91% of people who went to religious services gave about $1,284 on average to charity. Meantime, the most of those who didn't attend religious services at all, they gave about $313 on average to charity. In other words, the more you go to a worship service of any kind, the more you tend to give to charity. And the less you attend worship services, the less you give. And that's a concern for all charities, not just religious ones, because religious people give very generously to many, many groups.
Why does going to religious services affect giving?
Well, there are a couple reasons, one of which is if you go to religious services on a regular basis, you're going to hear about the needs of the world through sermons, through sharing, through songs, through prayers. In the bulletin, for example, that there's a need somewhere, there was a natural disaster, and there will be an appeal to give. Plus, you're just going to see the collection plate being passed back and forth, and it's going to give you an opportunity to give, but remind you about the importance of giving. But another main reason is that all religions, it doesn't matter which one, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, Christian, Sikh, it doesn't matter, they all teach the obligation, the duty, the religious duty of giving to help those who are needy. That is something that is paramount to all religions. And so if you are religious and if you go to religious services, you're going to be reminded of that obligation on a regular basis. So that's something that keeps people giving and reminds them to keep giving to help those in need.
And that's created a worry in the charitable giving sector. So what's the situation facing charities today?
So right now, charities find themselves in an interesting predicament. Fewer Canadians than ever before are giving to charity. The finding of a new report by Imagine Canada, which is an umbrella group for Canadian charities, found that from 1997 to 2022, there was a drop in the number of people who claimed an income tax deduction when giving to charity. And of course, these would be the people who are giving the most to charity. It went from 26% in 1997 to 17.1% in 2022. And according to Imagine Canada, that is an unbroken trend, a decline in the number of people who are giving significant amounts of money to charity. And these are the people who make the biggest donations to charities.
Does it mean that charities overall are getting less money?
So that's an interesting thing. No, they're actually not. Fewer people are giving, but they're giving more. And the amount is rising. In fact, it peaked at $11.8 billion in 2021 before falling to $11.4 billion in 2022. And that's good news. Good news that charities are getting the money they need. But the bad news is that most of that money is coming from older donors and fewer donors. 71% of donations came from 9% of Canadian donors who gave $5,000 or more during that time period. And the problem, as I said, is that those people are getting older.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1997, 42% of donations came from people 60 years of age and older. In 2022, that number was 60% from that age group giving money. So donors are not getting younger, and it won't be too long before what we call the generous generation, grandparents and parents, the people older than us, will be gone, and they won't be giving the same amounts to charity. And that means charities might find themselves in a real predicament as the dollars dry up.
I'm sure, most of us know what charities in Canada do somewhat, but can you describe, the impact that charities have on people in our country?
It's hidden except unless there's a disaster or a predicament, right? When suddenly there's an appeal. When we hear something from Manitoba Harvest that they don't have enough carrots or potatoes or soup or something, and suddenly there's a run on food banks, then it makes the news. Otherwise, it just sort of hums below the surface and we don't think about it until there's an emergency of some kind. But charities in this country are keeping a lot of things going, particularly as governments have offloaded a lot of the services that they might otherwise do onto charities. So, for example, Manitoba Harvest is the second oldest food bank organization in Canada. It was started in 1986. And when it was started, I remember David Northcott telling me they thought it was temporary. We'll just do this for a year or two to get us through the crisis. Well, here we are, 40 years later, and it is a permanent fixture in our society, as are food banks right across this country. Whoever imagined such a thing? But now they are part of the structure, part of our infrastructure, and how we cope with things in this country.
And Harvest Manitoba and across the country also had, of course, as we know, historic years last year with food bank
and
use.
Needs keep rising.
Yeah.
And now with tariffs, who knows, right?
So let's return to sort of the younger generations. Why are younger people giving less?
Well, various factors, of course. Less disposable income, high housing prices, the high prices for almost everything. But fewer of them are going to church or mosque or gurdwara or temple or synagogue as well. And so that teaching about religious obligations, the need to care for those who are needy, is just not being passed down the same way. If you ask someone who's over the age of 65, where did you learn to be generous? Where did you start giving to charity? They probably will say something like Sunday school, when mom or dad gave them a quarter or a dime and said, you put this in the collection basket, because that's what we do as Christians, as Jews, as Muslims, as whatever. And that simply isn't being passed along the same way anymore.
So what can be done about it?
Well, we're not going to return to the 1950s and 60s when most Canadians went to church. That's not going to happen. So we're going to have to create something new, some new way of passing along the importance of being a responsible citizen in our country and thinking about those who have less and who are needy. And what that is, I can't say. I don't have the ideas or the answers right now. But what I do know is that the charitable sector needs to take this seriously, and they are. But the new government also can play a role. They could convene some meetings, bring together charities, and have spaces where people can talk about how do we pass along the information that people need to have about the needs in their community. And if those kinds of meetings are convened, I think they need to invite the faith communities as well to join them.
John, thank you very much for this.
You bet. Thank you.